In this video, we're going to cover what it is to play the Sorceress, the quintessential mage archetype in Lost Ark. They are known for being able to do a ton of damage safely from afar, as well as control areas of the battlefield with their elemental spells and status effects. Being a pure range DPS class that can do everything safely at a distance though, this does make her a pretty squishy target at the same time. What they do lack in health and toughness, they'll make up with their mobility and diversity of their skills. That's because every single Sorc spell has an AoE component, and many of them can wipe out mob groups in a single cast. The Sorceress's fire spells, for example, have destruction attached to them, and the class has a respectable amount of stagger too. Many of their spells also have status effects attached to them such as burn, freeze or electrocute, which will definitely help you control that battlefield. Some of the harder hitting spells are also used as primary single target damage too, and most major damage spells come with cast times, although you can often spec to remove them for a slightly weaker damage output. Still, Sorcs are an easy to pick up and very beginner friendly class because of their straightforward AoE heavy playstyle. So if you're looking for a class that can do lots of damage through huge burst or consistent damage spam whilst being safe and far away, look no further. Comparing the Sorceress to the other mage classes, it's by far the easiest to play, and hence the one that does the most consistent damage. When we compare the Sorceress to the Arcanist, their playstyle is way harder due to her 3-split skill kit and her RNG card draw identity. Comparing the Sorceress to the Bard, it's obvious that the Bard lacks a lot more damage, but it can make up for it with its utility. Unlike the other mages, the Bard is a support class, while the Sorc is a pure damage mage. Compared to those other ranged damage classes in the game though, as a Sorc you'll have a lot less mobility but far more impactful spells that can control the battlefield as well as do just a lot of damage. As Sorceress, you're all about building up your meter by dealing damage with your spells or consuming it with 2 identity spells. These work like this. You can activate your left ability, Arcane Rupture, anytime you have 30% or more filled up. This will give you increased casting speed and a good amount of damage on your spells on top. If you even wait until your meter reaches 100%, you'll go into a much more powerful state that amplifies that effect by a lot. In fact, it's really not recommended to activate your left identity ability before you fill up your meter completely, because of just how powerful your arcane torrent is at 100%. The other way to spend your arcane meter is by using your right identity skill called Blink. This will spend 30% of your bar to instantly teleport you over a long distance, so you can use this as a mobility skill, which can be used as both defensive or offensive tools. In PvE, you're going to spend most of your time alternating between your instant casts and waiting for your windows to cast those bigger spells, all depending on which playstyle and which spells you choose. Positioning and timing are key, as you need to pay attention when you're using those mobility skills to dodge bigger incoming damage or CC-like boss attacks. And because without the Sorceress, your party will lose a huge source of damage. In PvP, it's best to stay away from spells with long casting times and focus more on spells that can do small amounts but consistent damage safely. By combining consistent damage with the ability to control the battlefield through AoE status effects, a good Sorceress can really set the tempo for any match. The bane of any Sorceress though is a good mobility melee, sticking to you and chasing you down, especially those pesky Deathblades. That's why you're going to want to use your mobility wisely and coordinate with your team as much as you can, so you can make sure you play from a safe distance and continue to be as effective with those instacasts. Let's take a look at those abilities then and start off with our core fire element spells. The first one being Doomsday. Nobody wants to play a fire mage that can't drop a giant flaming rock on people, right? This is by far your hardest hitting spell and has plenty of stagger to boot. Be careful though, as it has a long cast time and a delay on impact, so you need to really understand the boss's attack patterns to reliably land this spell. Blaze is a staple fire spell all sorcerers use that may not be that exciting, but is pretty reliable. It shoots a line of fire that is safe and easy to land on enemies whilst applying a burn over time effect on them. It can also be recast fairly quickly and can amplify the damage of all of your spells, which is another great bonus. Inferno summons a pillar of flame that knocks up and burns all enemies hit. On top of that, this spell has respectable stagger and does good single target and weak point damage. Your main lightning spell will be Punishing Strike. This is what being a mage is all about, as it lets you summon a giant thunder from the sky that does an insane amount of damage. It's also great for both AoE and single target, as it has high stagger built into it. And lastly, your main ice spell in Seraphic Hail, which creates a huge wave to attack and push back all enemies multiple times in front of you. It has a pretty short cooldown and can be cast often to mainly keep enemies away, but also do some pretty good AoE damage too. As with all Lost Ark classes, the Sorceress has access to 2 awakening abilities, starting with Invisca's Might. This awakening gathers power to do massive lightning damage to all enemies around you. It pulls opponents in and hits them repeatedly while staggering them to a giant supernova finish. In addition to that, this powerful ability even makes you immune to all CC whilst you're casting. Then you've got that Apocalypse Call. True to its name, this awakening makes your Sorc drop meteors from the sky that do massive damage to anyone they hit. Unfortunately though, you have no control over where they land, so there's a lot more RNG in how effective this spell will be. For that reason, most people use Invisca's Might exclusively, since the RNG nature of Apocalypse Call makes it simply too unreliable. Every Lost Ark class has access to engravings that are going to focus your playstyle in one particular direction. For Sorcerers, you're going to have to choose between Reflux and Igniter. These are two completely different playstyles. If you're focused on having some of the highest burst damage in the game, the Igniter Sorc is for you. This engraving will heavily amplify the effect of your Arcane Rupture identity skill, giving you massive crit and crit damage. The downside of this engraving though is that it needs you to know the boss mechanics extremely well, because since all your hardest hitting skills have a cast time, you will lose most of your damage if you miss your burst windows upon activation. When you choose this engraving, any of those 3 damage stats will work for this build, but focusing on specialization to build your meter faster and do more damage with your spells is the best you can go for. Although you get innate crit from Arcane Rupture, you can also always add more crit as your second stat to make sure you see those big numbers. Swiftness, however, is also a very good choice though, as it helps you fit more spells into that burst window. The Reflux engraving completely removes your ability to use your Arcane Rupture identity skill, but it gives you increased damage and decreased cooldowns at all times. What that means is you can use your entire identity bar on blinks. This makes the build one of the most consistent and safe damage builds in the entire game. With low cooldowns, you can spam those instant casts all day or use bigger cast spells if that's your style. It just depends on what you are most comfortable with. Unlike the Igniter build, you need to be more careful with your secondary stats though. Specialization is not very useful for you since you don't need to build up your meter. So your primary focus should be on crit with some swiftness secondly. That should be everything that you need to know to get your journey started on Lost Ark. Don't forget to head on over to our website at mobalytics.gg to find out all sorts of other content including class guides, boss breakdowns and plenty more.